I'm here at Harvard Medical School with geneticist George Church, the pioneering DNA researcher. We're here to ask Professor Church some questions about extinction, permafrost, and woolly mammoths. Professor Church, most people think of extinction as permanent. Is that changing?
We have increasing capabilities of bringing back animals that have been, where embryos have been frozen, for example. But beyond that, we should be able to bring out animals which are long extinct. This hasn't been demonstrated yet, but certainly the pieces of it are in place. For example, with mammoths, we have and cave bears, we have pretty high quality DNA samples that are being sequenced. And you could bring back initially small numbers of traits like hair length and thickness and tusk shape and so forth, and eventually bring back arbitrarily as many of those traits as you'd like to.
So we're not really talking about bringing back a woolly mammoth. We're talking about merging an old species with a new species.
Exactly, right. So they're closely enough related that you can modify the genes of one until you successively approximate the other. And in a way, you learn more this way than just reading the sequence. You're actually writing it to see whether you actually understand how it worked or not.
Okay, let's say you could reconstruct a woolly mammoth. Aside from the novelty, why would you do it? Is there something to be learned?
So I think there are a few rationale. There even the possibility that as we become more and more ecologically aware that we may want to rewild, and there are rewilding efforts to put large animals in areas where they've gone extinct. Now, these don't necessarily have to be large extinct animals. They could be large existing animals that we just move from one part of the earth to the other. But this is putting back the indigenous species is something that some zoologists think is a good idea.
What other species could be revived?
Well, I mean, again, it depends on whether you want to have an exact copy or something that looks like and behaves like and has metabolism of ancient species. But basically, there's no limit. I mean, the dodo, giant sloths, there are quite a few for which there's decent samples available.
So why is this possible now?
Well, so there's been huge advances in our ability to sequence DNA and to synthesize DNA. Both of them have undergone about a million-fold improvement in the last 6 to 10 years. Very rapid improvement in cost effectiveness and quality.
Talk about the ethical issues of bringing back an extinct species.
I think bringing back an entire Neanderthal, at least most of the ways we can imagine right now, would require cloning a human being, and a Neanderthal is basically the same species. And so since there's general levels of uncomfort about cloning humans, you would first society would have to decide that there's some value in cloning humans, and then much later they'd have to be convinced that a Neanderthal would not be in pain or otherwise a burden on society or anything like that. But it's an open question as to whether there will be a medical imperative at some point to allow non-therapeutic cloning. I mean, it's an open question. That's what science is about.
Talk about genes, ethics, and doping in sports.
Now, for example, in sports, you have ways of overcoming your genetic limitations by changing your environment. You can train at high altitude, and that increases your erythropoietin, which increases your blood. Now, you've done that in a, quote, natural way, but if you were to do that by directly injecting erythropoietin, that might be frowned upon, even though they're physiologically very closely related. If you had a genetic defect in this pathway that produced, say, high-performance blood or even normal performance blood, and you corrected it genetically, you might be doing that for medical reasons, but then does that disqualify you from athletics?
Are there athletes that have benefited from this kind of therapy?
So I don't know of any that have benefited directly from bone marrow transplants. There may be. Certainly Lance Armstrong underwent some marvelous transformation where he went from cancer patient to a very lean, high muscle mass. And that clearly involved drugs, at least for the cancer chemotherapy, if not additional ones that restored him to health. Now, do you begrudge him those drugs that saved his cancer and restored him to a good musculature that he needed to compete?
A sort of genetic doping.
Well, yeah, they could be genetic doping just by either parental choice, or they could be done after birth. They could be done by stem cell transfer. All of these things could be done to correct a genetic defect, but you might overcorrect slightly with not necessarily any intention to win an athletic event. But then you go on to win an athletic event, and they're going to go back and say, oh, your parents got married, because they were both very tall, right? Is that genetic doping? Or no, your parents gave you an injection of these stem cells when you were very young and you didn't even know about it, right? Is that genetic doping and so on? I think it could be quite blurry. I mean, there's really nothing natural about the kinds of shoes that we wear, the kind of, the way that we train and so forth. We've left behind nature, and sports is a place where we actually retain a little bit of nature, and maybe that's the whole point. But it's radically different, and it will continue to evolve.